Hans Holbein the Elder, often overshadowed by his more famous son, yet a pivotal figure in late 15th and early 16th century German painting. Born in Augsburg and working across the shifting cultural landscape of the Holy Roman Empire, Holbein the Elder helped shape a regional style that bridged late Gothic ornament and Renaissance naturalism. He ran a busy workshop, painted impressive altarpieces and Madonnas for civic patrons, and trained the next generation of artists, including the Holbein, who would later become the portraitist of Tudor England. In his hands, devotional images retained medieval intimacy while absorbing new ideas about anatomy, space, and color. If you look closely at later masterpieces, portraits that breathe with psychological insight, or altarpieces that compress centuries of devotional practice into a single panel, you can see an inheritance of draftsmanship, attention to fabric, and the sober palette that started in part with the elder Holbein's practice. Today, we'll trace his life, his surviving works, and the traces of his hand in the art of his time and after him. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps us keep creating more educational videos like this one. Hans Holbein the Elder was born around the 1460s into a generation still shaped by the decorative Gothic tradition. Records connect him to Augsburg, a thriving commercial city where painters, goldsmiths, and printmakers exchanged ideas. Early in his career, Holbein worked on ecclesiastical commissions, altarpieces, saints' panels, and painted shrines. These works combined meticulous ornament, carved Gothic frames, patterned textiles, and gilded halos, with an increasing interest in natural observation. Where medieval art often flattened space, Holbein began to suggest depth through architecture and drapery, and to model faces with a greater sense of individual bone structure. He also managed a workshop that handled multiple commissions at once. Assistants would paint backgrounds, while the master reserved the delicate faces and hands. That collaborative structure explains why some altarpieces survive with variations in quality. The master's hand is most obvious where emotional focus lies. Although many of his original panels have been lost or misattributed, his stylistic fingerprints can still be reconstructed by comparing works from Augsburg and nearby towns. Holbein the Elder's bread and butter were religious commissions. Altarpieces known from archives and a few surviving fragments show how he balanced narrative complexity with devotional clarity. His Madonnas, Virgin and Child compositions in the Northern Sacra Conversazione tradition, place holy figures in intimate, domestic spaces rather than grandiose, distant heavens. Look at the lush cloak, the carefully observed hands, the delicate crown of the Madonna in the Solothurn and Darmstadt groups. These details reveal both care for sacred symbolism and a craftsman's respect for tactile surfaces. Holbein favored linden or limewood panels, chalk ground, and glazes that achieved warm flesh tones. Even when only fragments survive, you can see an economy of means: clear silhouettes, modest color schemes, and patterned carpets or textiles that anchor the scene. Those carpets and brocades served not just decoration, but to indicate status and to guide the viewer's eye toward the faces and gestures that carry meaning in the scene. Although Hans Holbein the Elder is best known for religious painting, portraiture was becoming increasingly important in his era, and Holbein's studio produced likenesses that anticipated the psychological subtlety of later Northern Renaissance portraits. His circle included humanists and city officials, and the intellectual climate pushed artists to record individuals with greater fidelity. The elder Holbein's draftsmanship, crisp contours, precise hands, keen attention to textiles, established a language his son would expand into full psychological portraiture. When we look at portraits by Hans Holbein the Younger, the penetrating head of Erasmus, the studious Nicolaus Kratzer, the courtly sitters at Henry VIII's court, we can detect inherited practices: the discipline in the line, economy of background, and the way a sitter's hands or an object is used to tell a story. That storytelling instinct appears in the elder's civic portraits and workshop drawings, where an attribute or a book transforms a likeness into a statement about learning, office, or piety. To understand Holbein the Elder, we must also understand how workshops operated in his time. A master controlled design, underdrawing, and the crucial passages of face and hands. Apprentices laid ground layers and painted backgrounds. Infrared studies of northern panels show meticulous underdrawing, confident strokes that map proportions and drapery folds before pigment ever touches the wood. Holbein used tempera and oil glazes in combination, exploiting tempera's quick-drying precision for details and oil's translucency for luminous flesh. His palette tended toward muted, earthy tones, siennas, umbers, cool greens, punctuated by rich reds or lapis blues when patrons could afford pigments. Pattern and texture mattered. Brocades, beaded headdresses, and carved furniture provided a theater of surfaces that displayed civic pride and the painter's virtuosity. Around 1500, printmaking also reshaped how compositions circulated. Designs, motifs, and even facial types traveled between workshops through prints and drawings, blurring authorship but spreading stylistic vocabulary across cities. What makes Hans Holbein the Elder especially interesting is his direct link to the towering figure of Hans Holbein the Younger. The son inherited not only technical skill but a workshop culture and an eye for combining northern detail with Renaissance clarity. Compare the devotional calm of elder altarpieces with the Younger's intense realism in the body of the dead Christ in the tomb. The Younger's dead Christ, brutally honest, almost forensic in its rendering, pushes the Elder's concern for anatomy to an extreme. Likewise, the Younger's Last Supper and portrait masterpieces such as The Ambassadors show an expanded language of space, figure placement, and symbolic objects. But many of these compositional tools were present in the Elder's approach. Careful arrangement of figures, symbolic props, and a restrained, composed palette that allowed faces to dominate the viewer's attention. In short, the Elder laid the foundations. The Younger built the architecture of Northern Renaissance portraiture on top of them. A few curiosity-driven moments help bring Holbein the Elder to life. First, the patchwork survival of his work. Reformation iconoclasm, panel worm, and later overpainting mean we rarely encounter a pristine Holbein Elder altarpiece. Sometimes a head, a hand, or a fragment survives in a museum drawer and only later is reunited on paper through scholarship. Second, pattern as biography. Carpets, brocades, and medallions are not mere decoration. They can identify patron families, workshops, or trade connections. Third, workshop economics. Masters like Holbein negotiated guild politics, commissions from civic councils, and the same market pressures that made portraiture commercially viable. And finally, attribution puzzles persist. Because father and son shared a workshop vocabulary and apprentices completed many works, distinguishing the Elder's hand from the Younger's can be a detective story involving dendrochronology, pigments, and stylistic micro-details. How can we recognize the Elder Holbein in a painting? Look for a sober, balanced composition, careful, economical modeling of faces, tactile attention to textiles and carved details, and a devotional restraint that keeps emotion measured. The Elder's figures often occupy shallow spaces framed by architectural niches or patterned textiles. If a panel feels like an elegant negotiation between medieval narrative and Renaissance observation, neither entirely remote nor aggressively psychological, you may be in the realm of Hans Holbein the Elder or his immediate circle. Art historians also rely on technical clues, underdrawing style, panel wood species, and pigments that local workshops preferred. When scholars reconstruct his oeuvre, they not only recover a single artist, they illuminate a whole network of workshops and the shifting tastes at the dawn of the Reformation. Holbein the Elder stands as a figure both foundational and strangely elusive. He built a workshop language that bridged centuries, trained a son whose fame would eclipse his own, and produced works that quietly translate devotional life into carefully observed images. To study him is to look for continuity, of line, of material, and of a regional sensibility, and to appreciate how artistic ideas travel across generations. Next time you encounter a Northern Renaissance Madonna or a crisp civic portrait, pause and look for those hallmarks: the careful line, the patterned textile, the quietly intense face. You'll see the echo of a master who taught a generation how to see.